Karen, our HOA president, kept stealing packages from my private rural mailbox, claiming compliance review gave her access. I filed complaints. Nothing happened. So I left her a bait box rigged, recorded, and containing a little federal surprise. Let's just say she didn't expect to trigger a felony on camera, or what I used to do for a living. The initial thefts were almost laughably bold, a grotesque parody of authority. My mailbox, you see, isn't some communal cluster box at the edge of a manicured cul-de-sac. It's a sturdy, somewhat battered Stanley model, planted firmly in U.S. soil at the end of a half-mile gravel driveway, clearly on my private property, miles from the nearest HOA-maintained patch of grass. Yet Karen, with the zeal of a petty dictator inspecting her fiefdom, had decided it fell under her purview. The first package was a set of specialized drill bits, hardly a threat to community standards. It vanished. The second, a birthday gift for my daughter, also disappeared, only for the empty, ripped-open box to be disdainfully tossed back onto my porch a day later, with a curt, unsigned note: non-compliant packaging. Ensure all deliveries adhere to Section 4, subsection B, of the Community Guidelines regarding aesthetic harmony. I checked Section 4, subsection B. It pertained to the approved color palette for garden gnomes. The audacity was breathtaking. I imagined her, resplendent in her beige power suit, tearing into a child's gift with the gravity of a bomb disposal expert, then finding only a brightly colored unicorn sweater, her face contorting in righteous disapproval of its flagrant violation of beigeness. I filed a report with the local sheriff's office. Deputy Miller, a young man whose ambitions seemed to have peaked with the acquisition of his mirrored sunglasses, listened with an air of profound boredom. HOA dispute, huh? Sounds like a civil matter, sir. He advised me to talk it out with Karen, as if one could reason with a rabid badger convinced it was an eagle. I tried the HOA board, a collection of timid sycophants who seemed to exist solely to rubber-stamp Karen's increasingly unhinged edicts. Their response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion, essentially stating that President Karen had their full confidence in all matters of community integrity, including, apparently, federal mail routes. My wife Sarah watched my mounting frustration with a worried frown. "It's not just the packages, is it?" she asked one evening, her voice soft. No, it wasn't. It was the principle. It was the invasion. It was the casual, arrogant assumption of power over my private life, my property, my mail, a federally protected channel. There's a sanctity to the mail, a contract between the citizen and the government, that Karen was trampling with her sensible, HOA-approved orthopedic shoes. The feeling was unpleasantly familiar, a distant echo of past confrontations where lines were crossed and boundaries violated, though usually with far higher stakes than unicorn sweaters. This, however, was my home, my peace. My daughter's disappointed face when her gift was delayed. The switch didn't flip with a dramatic clang. It was more like a cold, quiet click, a tumbler falling into place. Karen had mistaken my patience for weakness. She had no idea who she was prodding. Karen's transgressions escalated with a smug confidence that grated on my nerves, like sandpaper on bone. She wasn't just stealing, she was performing, leaving her little territorial markers. One morning, I found a package of organic dog biscuits I'd ordered for Buster, our aging Labrador, torn open. Half the biscuits were gone, presumably consumed by Karen's yappy miniature poodle, a creature whose primary personality trait was aggressive ankle-nipping. A new note was affixed. Contents reviewed for compliance. Approved, though excessive sodium noted. See Guideline 7. See Guideline 7. See, I later discovered, referred to acceptable decibel levels for outdoor wind chimes. The gaslighting was almost artistic in its perversity. She was daring me, her actions a silent taunt. I'd see her sometimes, driving slowly past my driveway entrance in her golf cart, which she'd somehow gotten licensed for road use within the broader rural area, a mobile throne from which she surveyed her dominion. She'd offer a tight, knowing smirk, the kind that said, "I am the law," and your fancy drill bits are now my paperweights. My family felt the chill. My son Leo, who was home from college for the summer, started referring to our mailbox as Checkpoint Karen. My daughter Emily simply asked, "Why does she hate us, Dad?" It was a child's question, cutting through the adult absurdity to the heart of the matter. Inexplicable malice dressed as civic duty. "She doesn't hate us, sweetie," I tried to explain. "She just really, really likes rules. Even rules she makes up." But Emily wasn't fooled. She saw the meanness. Sarah's earlier question returned, more pointed this time. "John, you used to handle situations. People who didn't follow the rules. Big rules." Her hand rested on my arm, a silent acknowledgement of a past I rarely spoke of. A past involving secure facilities, encrypted communications, and men who played for keeps. "This is different," I'd said, but even as I spoke, I knew it was becoming less different by the day. The core issue was the same: a flagrant disregard for established boundaries, an abuse of power, a threat to order. Karen, in her small, self-important way, was a destabilizing element. And destabilizing elements, I had learned through years of rigorous, unforgiving training, needed to be neutralized. The decision crystallized not in a moment of anger, but in a period of cold, quiet contemplation. This wasn't about revenge in the hot-blooded sense. It was about restoring equilibrium. It was about demonstrating, in unequivocal terms, that actions have consequences, especially when those actions involve federal statutes. The local remedies had failed. The HOA was complicit. It was time to escalate, to move the conflict to an arena where Karen's petty regulations held no sway, and where my particular set of skills might find a more receptive audience. The calm that settled over me was profound. It was the calm of a plan taking shape, of a problem being systematically dismantled into manageable components. Karen was about to graduate from HOA nuisance to federal offender, and I was going to be her unwilling, but meticulously prepared, academic advisor. The first step was precision. No blundering, no emotional overreach. This had to be clean, irrefutable, and utterly within the bounds of legality. My legality, that is, not Karen's imaginary one. I began by meticulously documenting every incident: dates, times, missing items, her bizarre notes. I took photographs of the rifled packages, the condescending missives. It was an evidence log, not unlike those I'd compiled in other circumstances. Then came the research, a dive into the U.S. Code, specifically Title 18, Section 1708, theft or receipt of stolen mail matter generally. The penalties were not insignificant: fines, imprisonment, up to 5 years, or both. Karen, in her quest for aesthetic harmony and gnome color compliance, was tap dancing through a minefield of federal law. My next call was to Marcus Thorne. We'd come up together a lifetime ago, in a world where compliance meant something entirely different, usually involving hostile environments and targets who didn't write passive-aggressive notes. Marcus had transitioned, rather successfully, into the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, finding a perverse sort of satisfaction in chasing down mail fraud rings and porch pirates, with the same tenacity he'd once applied to more shadowy adversaries. I laid it out for him, clinically, factually. "Got a situation, Marcus. HOA president. Thinks her authority extends to federal mail. Repeated thefts. Documented. Claims compliance review." There was a pause on the line, then a low chuckle. "Compliance review? For U.S. mail? John, what kind of cul-de-sac did you retire to? Rural route? Private box? Half-mile off the main road? She's making special trips?" The chuckle died. "Okay, that's not just overreach. That's dedicated." "What are you thinking?" "Thinking she needs a more formal education on federal jurisdiction. Thinking of a package she won't be able to resist. Something that looks official, valuable, maybe a little sensitive." "A bait package," Marcus said, his voice now all business. "You know the protocols, John. We can't officially sanction entrapment unless there's a clear pattern and probable cause. Pattern established, Documented. Probable cause? She's practically leaving signed confessions, albeit for imaginary infractions. I emailed him my log, the photos. Another pause. All right, this is impressively bizarre. The notes are gold. Excessive sodium in dog biscuits. She's a piece of work. He then outlined the unofficial official dance. He couldn't tell me to set up a sting. But if a private citizen, concerned about ongoing mail theft, were to install their own surveillance and capture an act of said theft, and if that evidence was then provided to USPIS, well, they would be obligated to investigate. Hypothetically, Marcus said, his tone dry, if such a package were to contain, say, a GPS tracker and be filmed being unlawfully removed from a federally recognized mail receptacle by a specific individual, that would be compelling. Hypothetically, Marcus. That sounds like a plan. The old instincts kicked in, the quiet hum of operational planning. This wasn't about a unicorn sweater anymore. This was about the clear, unambiguous assertion of federal law over local delusion. Karen had chosen her battleground poorly. She thought she was fighting for the soul of the HOA. She was about to find herself in a federal court. The components for the educational package were sourced with discreet precision. It wasn't about creating something dangerous, merely something irresistibly official-looking and, crucially, trackable and recordable. I settled on a standard USPS priority mailbox. Inside, I placed a defunct piece of medical monitoring equipment, something that looked expensive and technical, cushioned in foam. To this, I affixed a small, high-fidelity GPS tracker, the kind favored by private investigators and paranoid spouses, capable of real-time location updates accurate to within 5 feet. The real artistry, however, lay in the packaging and labeling. I designed a series of official-looking labels, printed on high-quality adhesive stock. Medical equipment. Handle with extreme care. Sensitive electronics. Do not. X-ray. Delivery confidential. Addressee signature required. The addressee was a fictitious Dr. Alistair Finch, CO my address. The sender was a non-existent medical research facility. The crowning touch was a bright red, contents monitored by federal agents sticker, small but prominent. It was a bluff, of course, but one designed to either deter a casual thief or, in Karen's case, perhaps pique her officious curiosity even further. She might see it as a challenge to her authority, another, non-compliant item daring to enter her domain without her express approval. The surveillance aspect required equal care. My old bird feeder, positioned on a sturdy oak opposite the mailbox, became the host for a compact, weatherproof 4K camera with night vision and motion detection. It had its own power source and transmitted wirelessly to a secure server I controlled. I spent an afternoon calibrating the angle, ensuring a clear, unobstructed view of the mailbox door and anyone approaching it. The quality was broadcast level, sharp enough to see the brand of Karen's lipstick if she got close enough. There was a grim satisfaction in the meticulous preparation, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It was like sighting in a rifle, knowing that precision and patience would yield the desired result. Each step, the choice of box, the contents, the labeling, the camera placement, was deliberate, calculated. Sarah watched me with a mixture of apprehension and something that looked like relief. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she asked one evening, as I reviewed test footage from the bird feeder camera. "I'm enjoying the prospect of a permanent solution," I replied, not entirely untruthfully. The enjoyment wasn't in the act of entrapment itself, but in the methodical application of a countermeasure to a persistent irritant. It was problem-solving, albeit with a slightly more aggressive toolkit than most suburbanites employed. The final check. GPS active. Camera recording to cloud. Package sealed, and looking impressively important. I felt a sliver of the old adrenaline, the quiet focus before an operation. This wasn't Kandahar, but the principle of establishing control over a contested space remained oddly similar. Karen was the insurgent, and my mailbox was the outpost. The deployment was almost anticlimactic. Early morning, just after the genuine mail carrier had made his rounds and departed. I walked down the long driveway. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and pine. I placed the Dr. Finch package conspicuously among the few legitimate letters. It looked suitably out of place, important, almost demanding attention. Then, I retreated to my study, the nerve center of this small operation, a laptop displaying the live feed from the bird feeder cam, and I waited. The waiting is always the hardest part. It's a space filled with potential, with variables. Would she come today? Would she notice it? Would she resist the bait? My money was on her predictable avarice and self-importance. Hours passed. The sun climbed, heating the gravel drive. Birds chirped. A deer ambled across the far end of the lawn. Suburban tranquility, a thin veneer over the simmering drama. My phone, linked to the camera's motion sensor, remained silent. I worked on other things, glancing at the feed periodically, the mundane rhythm of a weekday. Then, at precisely 2:17 p.m., a flicker of movement at the edge of the frame. My phone buzzed. Adrenaline, cold and sharp. The golf cart. Karen's signature vehicle, puttering into view, its electric whine a familiar soundtrack to her petty tyrannies. She parked just beyond the mailbox, a habit, as if not wanting to be directly in line of sight from the house, though the dense summer foliage provided ample cover anyway. She emerged, clad in her usual HOA power uniform, khaki slacks, a crisp white polo shirt, visor shading her eyes. She moved with a proprietary air, as if inspecting a public utility. She didn't glance towards the house. Her focus was entirely on the mailbox. The camera angle was perfect. I could see her expression, a mixture of stern duty and a faint, almost predatory interest, as she opened the box. She shuffled through the legitimate mail first, a couple of bills, a catalog. Then her hand fell upon the bait package. She drew it out. I zoomed in slightly on the laptop. Her eyes scanned the labels. Medical equipment. Sensitive. Contents monitored. I saw a flicker of something. Surprise? Intrigue? Perhaps a spark of defiance. She turned it over in her hands. Waited. Her lips pursed. This was the moment. Would the federal agent's sticker give her pause? For a beat, I thought it might. She hesitated, looking around quickly. A furtive glance up and down the empty rural road. Then, decision made. She tucked the package under her arm, closed the mailbox with a decisive click, and strode back to her golf cart. No note left this time, no pretense of compliance review on site. This was outright theft, captured in stunning 4K clarity. As she drove away, I tracked her progress on the GPS app. A neat red line, moving steadily from my property, down the county road, and turning into the sprawling, manicured enclave of Harmony Glen Estates, straight to her own address. Checkmate. Stage 1 complete. The evidence was pristine, undeniable. The cold, quiet satisfaction was immense. Not of revenge, but of a strategy perfectly executed. Now, for the professionals. The call to Marcus was brief and to the point. Subject acquired the asset at 14:17 hours. Visual confirmation and GPS track active. Package currently located at her residence. Clean grab? Marcus asked, his voice devoid of surprise, only professional interest. Flawless. High-resolution video from approach to departure. GPS telemetry solid. She didn't even bother with a note this time, just took it. Good, he said. Send me the raw footage and the GPS data dump. Encrypted, of course. Of course, old habits. I spent the next hour compiling the data, encrypting the video file, and transmitting it through a secure channel Marcus and I had used in the past for less official correspondence. The file was large, the clarity unforgiving. It showed Karen's face, her actions, her decision, all laid bare. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. She had, with full intent, stolen U.S. mail. While the data uploaded, I replayed the moment of the theft in my mind. Her hesitation, then the almost defiant act of taking the package. It wasn't just the perceived value of the contents, I suspected. It was the assertion of her perceived dominance. The contents monitored by federal agents sticker had likely been the clincher, an affront to her absolute authority within her imagined sphere of influence. She probably thought it was me, trying to scare her. She had no concept of the line she was actually crossing. Marcus called back an hour later. Reviewed. John, this is textbook. The video is damning. The GPS corroborates perfectly. With her history of compliance reviews as prior acts, this is a slam dunk for 18 U.S. Code 1708. We can also look at 1702, obstruction of correspondence. What's the timeline? I asked. Given the clarity of the evidence and the subject's unique interpretation of her authority, I can probably get a warrant signed by a federal magistrate by morning. We'll pay Ms. Karen a visit tomorrow. Standard procedure. 2 inspectors, possibly with local PD backup for an abundance of caution, though I doubt she's a physical threat. She's a threat to the sanctity of the postal system, I said, unable to resist a touch of dryness. Indeed, Marcus agreed, a hint of grim amusement in his tone. And the U.S. Postal Inspection Service takes that very, very seriously. You just be a concerned citizen who reported a mail theft, John. Let us handle the official part. Understood. The rest of the day passed with a strange sense of calm. The wheels were in motion. Forces far greater than Karen's HOA fiefdom were now converging on her beige-colored world. I didn't feel triumph, not yet. Just a quiet anticipation, the feeling of a complex mechanism clicking precisely into place. Sarah noticed the shift in my demeanor. It's done, isn't it? She asked softly that evening. The initial phase, I corrected. The resolution phase begins tomorrow. She nodded, understanding the coded language. The small, localized storm Karen had brewed was about to meet a federal hurricane, and she wouldn't even see it coming until it was on her doorstep. The morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky, the kind of deceptively peaceful day that often precedes a significant event. I went about my routine, but an undercurrent of anticipation hummed beneath the surface. At precisely 9:45 hours, Marcus called. We're 5 minutes out from her address. Local PD is meeting us there. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Stay put. We'll be in touch. Good hunting, I said, using an old phrase we both understood. I pictured the scene. 2 dark sedans, official but understated, pulling into Harmony Glen Estates. The local police cruiser, lights perhaps off but presence undeniable, providing a touch of local color and authority. Karen would be in her domain, perhaps sipping her mid-morning coffee, planning her next strategic move against unapproved mailbox flora or overly enthusiastic welcome mats. The sheer, delightful irony was that her compliance reviews were about to be reviewed by a far higher and legitimate authority. I had the bird feeder camera feed up on my laptop. Not that I could see her house from there, but it was a symbolic link to the operation's genesis. Instead, I opened a local news scanner app, listening to the normally mundane chatter of dispatchers. An hour passed. Then, a new voice on the scanner, calm, professional. Dispatch, this is Unit 72, USPIS. We are on scene at 12 Serenity Lane with local PD. Subject is expressive. Expressive. I could only imagine. Karen, confronted by actual federal agents at her door, not HOA flunkies, would likely cycle through indignation, disbelief, and perhaps a dawning, terrifying realization that her self-awarded powers were illusory. Another 15 minutes. Then my phone rang. Marcus. Asset recovered, John. Package was unopened, stashed in her kitchen pantry behind a large box of organic quinoa. Subject is currently being Mirandized. She's taking it poorly. I could hear a faint, high-pitched, indignant squawking in the background. Karen, no doubt, mid-tirade about HOA bylaws and community standards, utterly failing to grasp the federal felony charges being explained to her. Did she offer any creative explanations? I asked. Oh, the usual, Marcus said, a weary professionalism in his voice. Claimed it was a misunderstanding. Said she was holding it for compliance inspection. When we pointed out it was addressed to a Dr. Finch at your address, and that her HOA has no jurisdiction over U.S. mail. She insisted she was performing a community service by ensuring suspicious packages were vetted. He paused. She actually asked if we knew who she was, told us she was the HOA president, and demanded to speak to our supervisor. Classic, I murmured. And the local PD? Initially a bit bewildered, then quite helpful once they understood the federal jurisdiction. I think Deputy Miller was there. He seemed rather wide-eyed. He might finally understand what a real crime looks like, beyond kids TPing a house. The image of Deputy Miller, who dismissed my initial concerns so casually, now witnessing federal agents arresting his local HOA president, was satisfying in a small petty way. So, what happens now? She's being transported for processing. Charges will be formally filed. Mail theft, 18 U.S.C. 1708. Given the evidence, her defense is non-existent. She'll likely plead out to avoid a trial, but she's facing serious consequences regardless. Loss of her HOA position is the least of it. Federal felony conviction, potential fines, probation, maybe even a short stint if the judge wants to make an example, plus the humiliation. Yes, the public unraveling. For someone like Karen, whose entire identity seemed wrapped up in her perceived authority and neighborhood standing, that would be a punishment in itself. The news of Karen's arrest spread through Harmony Glen Estates and the surrounding rural community like wildfire fanned by a digital sirocco. First, it was hushed whispers, then next-door app explosions, then a small factual piece in the local online paper. Local HOA president arrested on federal mail theft charges. The accompanying photo was Karen's official HOA portrait, her smile tight and self-satisfied, juxtaposed with the stark headline. It was a masterpiece of unintentional irony. My phone began to buzz with calls and texts from neighbors I barely knew, both from within the HOA and outside it, all expressing a mixture of shock, disbelief, and, in many cases, thinly veiled delight. It turned out Karen's reign of officious terror had extended far beyond my mailbox. There were tales of her measuring lawn heights with a ruler, issuing fines for unharmonious wind chimes, and attempting to dictate the breeds of dogs residents were allowed. She had, it seemed, been a one-woman committee for making everyone's life miserable. The HOA board, once so quick to affirm their confidence in President Karen, issued a panic statement expressing their profound shock and dismay, and announcing an emergency meeting to address the leadership vacuum. Translation: they were scrambling to distance themselves from her radioactive fallout. Within days, Karen was out on bail, a much diminished figure. The smug certainty was gone, replaced by a hunted look. She resigned from her HOA presidency via a terse email, citing personal reasons. The little federal surprise had done its work thoroughly. Marcus kept me updated on the legal proceedings. As predicted, faced with irrefutable video evidence and the unambiguous nature of federal law, Karen's high-priced lawyer quickly advised her to seek a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony mail theft. Her sentencing included a hefty fine, 5 years of federal probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and, perhaps most galling for her, a court order prohibiting her from holding any position of authority in any community association for a decade. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with little patience for abuses of power, had delivered a pointed lecture during sentencing about the importance of respecting federal laws and the privacy of mail. She'd even mentioned the absurdity of using HOA bylaws as a pretext for criminal activity. I never saw Karen again. Rumor had it she sold her house at a loss and moved to another state, presumably one with laxer views on mail integrity or, perhaps, no HOAs at all. My mailbox, once a battleground, became just a mailbox again. Packages arrived unmolested. My daughter got a replacement unicorn sweater, even more sparkly than the first. Buster enjoyed his organic dog biscuits without fear of sodium audits. The peace that settled over our property was profound. The aftermath was more than just the absence of Karen's meddling. It was a subtle but significant shift in the local atmosphere. The Harmony Glen HOA, chastened and rudderless, underwent a period of introspection, or at least as much introspection as a collective of suburban homeowners is capable of. New leadership was elected. Individuals who seemed more interested in maintaining the communal pool than in legislating the color of garden gnomes. The fear Karen had cultivated, that constant low-level anxiety about being cited for some imaginary infraction, dissipated. People started planting brighter flowers. Wind chimes, previously muted, tinkled more freely in the breeze. It was as if a low-pressure system had finally moved on. My role in Karen's downfall remained largely unknown, just as I preferred. To most, I was simply the guy whose mail kept getting stolen, the catalyst for an investigation that finally brought a local tyrant to justice. Marcus, true to his word, had kept my deeper involvement discreet. Only he, Sarah, and now perhaps a few observant federal agents knew the extent of my cooperation. The bird feeder camera was eventually repurposed to actually watch birds. The secure server was wiped. The skills I'd honed in a different life, tracking far more dangerous prey, were laid dormant once more. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing they hadn't entirely rusted away. Sometimes, the most effective solutions are those applied with surgical precision, even in the most unexpected of theaters. A few weeks after Karen's sentencing, I received a small, nondescript package. Inside was a simple plaque, the kind given for civic service. It read, "To John, for services rendered in the protection of the U.S. mail. Your friends at USPIS." There was no official letterhead, no signatures, just that. Marcus, no doubt. I smiled. It was a fitting, understated acknowledgement. I placed it on a shelf in my study, a small reminder that sometimes, even in the quietest corners of life, vigilance is required, and that lines, once drawn, must be defended. The sanctity of my mailbox was restored, but more than that, a measure of order and sanity had returned to our small part of the world. Karen had learned a hard lesson about the difference between perceived power and actual law. And perhaps, just perhaps, others had learned that even the most overbearing HOA president is no match for a determined citizen with a clear understanding of federal statutes and a well-placed camera. The mail continued to arrive, day after day, a simple, reliable symbol of connection and trust, now blessedly free from compliance reviews. The story, however, didn't quite end with Karen's departure and the restoration of postal peace. The ripples of her downfall continued to spread, subtly altering the landscape of our local governance. The neighboring HOAs, having witnessed the spectacular implosion of Harmony Glen's leadership, began to quietly review their own bylaws and the conduct of their more zealous board members. There was a noticeable dialing back of petty enforcement across the county, a sudden, shared institutional memory of what happens when perceived authority collides with actual federal law. It was as if Karen's case had served as a stark, cautionary tale. Here be dragons, or rather, here be postal inspectors with warrants. My own life returned to its placid rural rhythm, the drama fading into a memorable anecdote, albeit one I mostly kept to myself. The quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, a boundary reinforced, lingered. Sarah often commented on the change in me, not a return to the man I was in my previous life, but a subtle integration, a sense that the skills and mindset I'd once compartmentalized had found a constructive, if unconventional, outlet. "You seem more settled," she'd said. "Like you finally got to file something in the right cabinet." She was, as usual, perceptive. There's a particular peace that comes from restoring order, however small the scale. The Dr. Finch package, or rather its empty shell, was eventually disposed of, its mission accomplished. The medical device inside, I donated to a local electronics recycling program. Its brief, starring role as bait was over. Yet, the memory of its careful preparation, the anticipation, the clean execution of the plan, these remained, not as a source of dark pride, but as a reminder that reasoned, methodical action can overcome even the most entrenched absurdity. Sometimes, friends would visit, and if the conversation turned to neighborhood eccentricities or HOA horror stories, I'd listen with a knowing Mona Lisa smile. I never volunteered my own tale in its entirety. It was too specific, too operational. But the core lesson, that an individual, armed with patience, documentation, and a clear understanding of the rules of engagement, the real ones, not the imaginary ones, can prevail, was a universal one. The legacy of Karen's reign was, paradoxically, a stronger, more respectful community, at least for a while. People talked to each other more, perhaps bonded by their shared experience under her petty tyranny, or perhaps simply relieved that the oppressive scrutiny had lifted. The world, it seemed, was a little brighter, without the constant threat of a citation for an unharmonious petunia. And my mailbox? It stood as a silent, sturdy sentinel, a testament to the fact that while some battles are fought on grand stages, others unfold on quiet country roads. Over stolen packages and the fundamental right to receive one's mail unmolested. Justice, I reflected, doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a gavel. Sometimes it arrives in a plain brown box, meticulously planned, and delivered with cold, irrefutable precision. And sometimes that's more than enough.